was going to come, and I thought Sean might join us. I'm not sure.
Okay. Well, they may just jump in a minute. So we'll make a start. This is the general mentoring session. So open to any questions you like or anything you want to share.
Yeah.
Will be all good.
Okay. All right. There's Mary.
Yeah,
well, we've had a whole bunch going on here on this side of the pond with this election. Boy, I tell you, it has been.
Yeah, I
don't even like to look at the newspapers or my Facebook feed. There's just
Facebook
so
feeds are terrible. I mean, it must be 80% of everything that's posted in a minute is just about the election. Yeah. And it's just like, oh, get over it, do it, get it finished quick. It's just like, just so much, really, isn't it?
Yeah. And then when you do a little bit of research, you find out that wasn't true at all. That was just, stuff that wasn't even right. If you really dig into it, that there's probably maybe 20% of it is true. So you have to take everything with a grain of salt.
Everything. And I do with anything on Facebook that Christians post, unless it's a personal testimony of something they've actually experienced themselves, they just post the most ridiculous things. Like, oh, Harvard University has found within DNA a message from God. I don't know how many times that one's been posted. And people just don't go back and look, oh, the original thing came from a spoof site. Don't you check out that? No, you're so naive that the things you'd like to be true, you're willing to propagate without any basis of foundation to it, which is not helpful, because it just promotes that Christians are stupid, basically. Every time I see that, I just post, this is a spoof. Check your sources. Because there is no truth. Go to the Harvard University website and actually look and see. It isn't there. It never was there. But it's things like that just is typical, really, of almost like clutching at straws with hopefulness that this is amazing. And in essence, yes, within our DNA is the essence of God, but because we're made in his image, but not the way that they're promoting it, And unfortunately, a lot of the stuff with the election, all that is exactly the same. Just rumors and gossip and things which are promoted, which are nothing really to do with the truth at all. And people just post them because it fits in with what they believe and what they want. So, for some, they'll be posting bad things against Trump because that fits in with what they believe. And some will be posting bad things about Hillary because of what they believe. And it's just like, oh, come on. Start posting something which is good about God, or what he's doing, rather than, it must be 75-80% of my Facebook stream is all about the election and all the nonsense that's going on around it. Sad, really. I mean, it's a reflection of where people's relationships with God are, that they're so caught up in the fear produced around it, rather than trusting God. Seek first the kingdom. I mean, come on, it's just fairly basic. Do we trust that God's bigger than all this? And the more we understand our role in sonship in terms of restoring creation and bringing an answer to creation's groan, we should be not playing this political game of nonsense, and let's start looking at the kingdom. That's a higher kingdom anyway. And the mountain of the house of the Lord will be raised up above all those other mountains, whatever they are, because people were going to start to come to us. Well, they're not going to start coming to us if we got stupid answers like, some of the things that people post on Facebook.
Well, that and all these prophets that have all these prophecies. The Lord told me this. I've been to the throne room. I saw this and this. But then they finish it up with, if you don't vote this way, then God's going to judge you and everything's going to turn to, everything's going to blow up in our faces. And it's like, whoa, okay. There's something wrong with this picture.
Oh, totally. Yeah. A, it's wrong that prophets should even be saying that stuff. B, it's wrong that they then should be trying to influence what others do. And then it gives them a way out, because all they'll say is, oh, people didn't vote, therefore God didn't get what he wanted. And it's just like as if God is reliant on our votes, in the bigger picture and the bigger scheme of things. And it's just sort of like, oh, what are you presenting? You're presenting a whole understanding of things. And well, what about the prophets who are saying the opposite that you're saying? So what are they actually listening to? Who are they listening to? And it doesn't do God, well, it doesn't do our cause any favors in terms of credibility when you have all this stuff out there, because even if God did show them something, what are they supposed to do with that? Now, if they say they're a prophet, well, then their view would be, well, I'm supposed to prophesy it. And unfortunately, that's the problem. It's like, I think I should do this because this is I am this, therefore I must do that. And that creates a major problem in what we're seeing. And we're seeing, so much which just really challenges the credibility that the church Christianity has. I mean, it does. And I look at it and think, oh my word, what are we presenting here? Because even those prophets are, those who are prophets are basing a lot of their stuff in fear, and it isn't really the nature and character of God at all. They're coming from a very retributive view of what God's like rather than a restorative view. And we need to see God as a author of restoration, not retribution. And that would change dramatically this whole stuff of judgment and punishment and how God is going to do this because you didn't do this. And, as if he's really that bothered, in this grand scheme of things. What he really wants is us to really know him. And how much of what's being presented really presents the truth of who God really is and what he's really like and what it's like when you get into an intimate personal relationship with him. It's always going to be this understanding of what people say God's like from a theoretical perspective, drawing that from their understanding of scripture to what God is really like when you meet him up close and personal. And I really believe Jesus is coming to his people in a more overt way, and he's basically saying the same thing as he said when he was on earth. You have heard it said, but I say unto you. And I think more and more that is going to happen, where what we thought, because of what we heard other people said, is going to be challenged by what Jesus really says, and therefore what God is really like, and his character and his nature. And it's just as soon as you get a glimpse of light pierces darkness, all of a sudden you can see, how did I miss all this? How did I miss all that? How did I not see that before? And then, the very few things that I do see on Facebook, not that I look at it a huge amount, but the very few things that now stand out are the things that I couldn't see before, even though they were there. And now they stand out to me, and I'm like, wow, you're actually saying something that I just engaged, and you're saying it, and you're saying it, and you're saying it. And before, I didn't hear anyone saying it. Now I realized that I just couldn't hear before, and I couldn't see before. I realized so much of my experiences were limited by what I could understand and what was framed, rather than, you know, this experience of I saw it, and I was able to only relate to it at the level I was at the time. And that's and so Jesus takes me back, and I'm like, I didn't see this last time. Why couldn't I see this? It was always there. Oh, I asked him, I said, well, did that change? No, he said it was always there. Well, why couldn't I see it? Because your mind wouldn't let you see it. You wouldn't have believed it was there, therefore you couldn't see it. I've been trying to show you it's there, but you couldn't see it. Now you can. You know, and I think there's a lot of where our understanding of God is going to be challenged, and the roots of that understanding is going to be challenged by our encountering God and what he does. So it's a good thing. I mean, it's a really good thing. And I think we just have to be willing to go with it. And when your brain is screaming out to you, no, you know, ask why it's screaming out to you, no. You know, where does that no come from, when actually my experience completely contradicts that no? So, you know, and I know you'll get, you know, the sort of religious perspective of, well, you know, you're establishing your understanding of God on your experience rather than what the Bible says. Well, the Bible actually is written by people who had an experience and shared it. You know, it wasn't written from a theory. Moses actually encountered God and met him face to face. He wasn't writing from a story, you know, and as if we shouldn't have our own experiences of God to inform what he's like by personal relationship with him. But that will be challenged, because I think more and more you cannot rely on what other people have said. You have to engage God yourself, which is what this whole, whatever it is about we can all hear God for ourselves, all have a personal encounter with him and know him personally, intimately, which he will reveal himself to us and what he's really like. And that will shock us sometimes, what he's really like, because we didn't think he could be like that. And it's all going to be from a positive perspective, not a negative one. So I think we are in that place where this is going to start happening more and more. We've got to be prepared for that, and not be bound. You know, this whole thing with the mind, and you know, I was talking about last time I think we met and different things. You know, and this, you know, I just have over the last few weeks just had such challenges over these constructs that my mind is created with. You know, I mean, it's so funny when God started to show me, and I'm like, I didn't even understand what he was saying. I had to go and look it up and Google what it meant, because I didn't even know what some of the terminology he was using meant. You know, other than my mind is framed according to that, but I don't even know what that is. You know, so that has been quite an interesting thing. And I just loved when I sort of started talking to him and said, well, what are you going to replace this with? You know, so if these 9 pillars that are the foundations of how my mind is constructed, within the framework of that limitation, what's going to be when they get removed? You know, these sort of the 9 roots of the tree of life. I'm like, oh, yippee, that's going to be great. You know, because I've always envisaged my mind being like a tree. You know, because you see it sometimes when you see all the neurons, all the things. It's like this sort of living thing. You know, I might have saw it that way, but that's not how it is been. You know, it's been a actual mechanical construction made of other people's belief systems that my mind has adopted. You know, so now those pillars have to be removed. You know, one by one. Fortunately, I pleaded with God, please remove those pillars one by one, not all in one go, because I'm losing my mind. but I'm losing it one pillar at a time, fortunately, rather than 9 pillars at once, which might be very interesting. So, and so far he's removed 3 pillars, and I'm still like reeling from, whoa.
Are you free to share what those pillars are yet? Or is this a personal? Personal.
It is personal. It is personal. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely personal in that it's the pillars that are in my mind. And I imagine there'll be a lot of other pillars in other people's minds, which will be different. But I can probably, let me see if I can find it. I wrote them down somewhere. My other computer. Let's see if I can find it.
Well, while you're looking for that, Mike, even all this stuff we're talking about, like, we talked about deconstruction and even the stuff that's happening politically and in the world, I'm really realizing the very thing we've been praying for. I mean, like praying for change and praying for revival and praying for his fire.
Yeah.
This is really what it is. It's not what we thought it was going to be.
Nope. That's absolutely right. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the key. We frame what we think from our previous experience, and so many people are wanting what it always like. We want revivals. We want a new Azusa Street. We want a new Welsh revival. We want a new one that's happened before, and we miss when God comes and miss it was even God, and that's, that's what happens, which is why God can't be put in a box or do other things. But yeah, the nine things that were, in my mind, which I understand a lot of them, but I still don't understand actually what it really is, but I understand the words, were evangelicalism, sola scriptura, Greek thought, Hebrew thought, Augustinianism, Protestantism, scientific rationalism, cultural relativism, and humanism. Those were the 9 pillars that are constructed my mind, my worldviews. So I'm sort of now like, okay, what is scientific rationalism? Well, I understand what scientific is and I understand what rationalism is, but actually what did that do to my mind? How did that create a way that I function? How does cultural relativism work within my mind? Essentially every one of those things is part of the pathway of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. That's where they came from, and Augustinianism is like, when I started to look into that, see, dualism and Platonic thought and all the stuff that sort of like, it's like that has just pervaded the whole Western church mindset. So I'm sort of allowing, and even Greek thought, I can understand, but even Hebrew thought is a construct which may not be correct from a God perspective, because I can just look at a system of thought and try and adapt to a system of thought rather than God, because it's all about how God thinks. I need the mind of Christ, which it says I have in theory, but very much not in practice, obviously, by the construct of this stuff that's in my mind. So I can understand why my mind was screaming, no, you can't believe that can't be true, but in reality, my experience then totally challenges and contradicts that. I think in terms of where they came from, I think some of them can be generational, because when I look at, it's very interesting. All elections and voting and things have thrown up quite a few things for me in terms of why I voted, why I did what I did. And then when our election, or when the Brexit thing was on, all our children actually happened to be home. And so I asked them what their views were. and their views were exactly like my views. I said, well, where did you get those views? Well, I don't know. I think, well, you must have got them from me, because you didn't come up with them by independent thought. You just believed this stuff. And I never really talked to you about politics, but you know from my opinionated statements probably where I was coming from. And did you come up with this yourself, or have you just assumed that this is the right way to think? So I found it very easy to see how it can come from another generation, and which is why you get, lower class, middle class, upper class, all that stuff, and people stay within their things because they continue the same patterns of thought that they adopted from their generation, and you sort of get, families, well, no one ever went to college from this family ever because, well, they don't. And then eventually someone breaks out of that or whatever. But I do think some of it is generational in that it's nurture, and it's through the things that we see and absorb from our surroundings and our families and different things. There may well be some genetic stuff potentially that could be epigenetic factors, that could be triggers to certain things possibly. I think in general it's been a realizing that has come through various sources in my mind, because of I've been going to church and engaging church since I was 2, in Sunday school and everything else. So I've been around that culture, and most of the people that I associated with were from that culture, through my whole childhood. When I went to grammar school when I was 12, because I passed my 11 plus and went to another town to go to school, I lost contact with a whole load of people I were in contact with before, and I made a whole load of new ones. And the very thing that I felt when I went there is, oh, these aren't like the people I knew before. What's different about this lot? And what I discovered was most of them had no concept of God, whereas most of the people I'd been brought up with did. And although some of that was from a religious sense in a religious town, because I lived in a very religious town, and the place I went to school with wasn't, it threw me back to saying, well, these people seem to have something better than these people have got. Because the people I engaged with now didn't seem to be as happy, didn't seem to be as nice or friendly. So it made me look at that, and that's how I got saved. As a result of looking at these two groups of people and what was missing from one and the other, it caused me to engage God for myself personally. So I understand that, who we're engaging with and who we're influenced by does have an effect. And so a lot of my constructs are from a religious sense, because I was surrounded by that. And then when I then started to become scientific in the sense of being drawn towards science and things like that, then I obviously took on other aspects of things that affected how my mind was constructed and how it engaged the world and how it filtered things through its constructs. So, I've asked myself and engaged with God, well, why did I believe that sort of theology, and not this one? What was it that triggered that within my mind? Because I was drawn to certain ways of thinking from a theological perspective rather than others. I know I realized they were all wrong, but what caused me to be drawn towards that? Because I want that sort of thing within my mind that will draw me to believe something about God that actually isn't true. I don't want it functioning. So, and I don't want it functioning in any other area of my life. So, this has been quite an interesting process. But I realized it's all from the wrong path. That's the key. None of it comes from the pathway of the tree of life. What's outside of that construct, and what sometimes God pierces through that construct and challenges what I believe has come through my experience. You know, it's come through, you know, sometimes, you know, in the past it would be, I read a book and I read that and it's just like, whoa, what's this? Never seen this before, because that was the way God got through to me during my life, through books, because I didn't have any personal experience of him. So I had to do it through someone else's saying something in a book, which, you know, was good, better than nothing. And then God got through to me in various ways. But once I got baptized in the Spirit, then things started to change, because I started to have experiences of God, which went beyond just the pure intellectual understanding of something. And my emotions opened up that, because my emotions were really closed before that, because of being damaged and hurt and, you know, those things we go through. My emotions were particularly closed down, therefore, so I didn't even relate to God in an emotional way. And then I found, you know, I started crying a lot. You know, I hadn't cried for years. You know, it's like all of a sudden I start crying a lot, you know, because something is breaking open the emotional aspect of being able to engage God as a person rather than a concept. So that changed a lot of things, you know, for me. Which is then my experiences have then begun to challenge what I believe, because it's very difficult once you've had an experience and you don't believe it. It puts you in a difficult spot, you know. So my experiences of in going deeper and deeper with God have challenged the things I believed about him, and, you know, and then these issues that come up, judgment and all that sort of stuff. And it's just like, well, this isn't the God that I know. So what I believed, I need to relook at from a perspective of having met God, not from a purely theological perspective of study and intellectual understanding of a particular subject or a particular thing, but mostly about God himself. Because I think that's the biggest problem that we face. If we're going to engage a world that needs to know God, the God that we know, or we've presented him and painted a picture of him, isn't the one that the world really wants. So we're going to have a really hard job selling the world a God that actually they don't want because they don't like. And we have done that by presenting him in that way and painting him in this particular way that is offensive to people. Now, I'm not saying that the gospel shouldn't be a challenge, because it should, but actually it is God's love, tolerance and patience, his kindness, that should draw us to changing our mind about him, not the fact that he's going to punish us, destroy us, torture us and torment us forever. Well, I wouldn't really want a relationship with God that does that sort of stuff. And that's how it gets challenged, because it's just like, well, you don't treat me that way. You know, even at my worst, you never treated me that way. You know, even when I was alienated for you, you died for me because you love me. So that does, you know, shape, you know, who is this God? You know, how is he love? You know, how is he light? You know, who is he? You know, and it's a great adventure to discover who he is by talking to him and encountering him, and not just reading about him in a book, you know, or expecting him to speak to you through that book as the only methodology of communication. So much better to walk with him like Adam did in the garden. And I love walking with God. I just love walking with him. You know, whenever he says, come, let's walk together, I know we're going to discover something that I never knew. And so it's a really exciting thing. I love it when he says that. And he said it quite a lot recently, you know, and taking me to places that I didn't even know I could go, you know. But the unveiling of that has left me being deconstructed effectively. You know, having been deconstructed in many other ways, I'm now being deconstructed in this way. So actually, I'm not going to be reconstructed. I'm going to be restored. And there's a huge difference between being restored and being reconstructed. And whatever we're doing in this sharing how we can engage God and heaven and all those things, we mustn't come up with another construct. We're introducing people into relationship, not another formula or another constructed thing. It's all about, no, we hear God for ourselves in relationship with him. Not that we have to do this, say this, or say this, or say this, or do this, or do this, or do the other. It's actually, no, he's looking for relationship and we can engage him in it. And that should be the foundation of what we do every day and live and how we express that. And the world will want, when we do lift up God, you know, Jesus said, you know, if I be lifted up. Now, he's obviously intimating the cross and everything else. But I think we are supposed to be the light of the world. Well, it's pretty dim. You know, it is not shining with 1,000,000 candle watts. It is pretty dim, and we are flickering at very least, which is why there's thick darkness covering the earth. Hey, but then light shines brighter when it's dark. So even that little flicker is good. But what would it be when it's just like the light that happened when God encountered Paul? It was so bright that he was blinded for 3 days as a result of it. Well, that's the light that we should be shining, transfigured, radiating that frequency of love, which will so reveal what God is really like that the world will say, we want that. Let's come to the mountain of the house of the Lord. You know, that even kings will come to the brightness of our rising. And it's like, we've all heard the scriptures, we've all seen it, but what is it to be that? Well, it's going to take some deconstructing of our minds and our DNA and everything else to get us to a point where we can radiate that glory and demonstrate truly the love of God by representing him as he really is, not how we've presented him to be because of what we were taught and what we were told by somebody else. Because I can't present that God anymore, you know, because that's not who he is. But, you know, very interesting journey. And I'm sure a lot more people are going to start to get deconstructed and restored, because you get restored to what it always should have been. You know, when you reconstruct something, you're using the bits that are already there. You know, and I don't want to be reconstructed from the things that have been deconstructed. You know, I don't want another construct in my mind. I want the organic mind of Christ, which flows from the tree of life. You know, not some other religious idea, however good it might be, you know, because it will still become a formula that I become a slave to, rather than a relationship that I enjoy. I mean, how much better would it be if we presented our relationship with God as something that was rather joyful, rather than something that's rather fearful?
Well, Mike, you were talking about when you were talking to your kids about the Brexit, and they all thought the same way that you do. In my American government class, we, of all things, we are, this whole section that we've been working in is like elections and political parties. I mean, it just happens to fall in the same time of what's going on here. But that is one thing that they brought up, is the family's influence on how children think. And they said, so that if you grew up in a family, if your parents were of one party, chances are the children are going to be the same, because that's what they've heard.
Yeah.
Even like with you, you said you didn't necessarily overtly come out and tell them what to think. They pick it up from your opinions. And so that's something that they know is a factor, and that there are other things that can cause people to change. Like Joe and I, we're like complete opposites of what our parents' thinking was growing up.
Yeah, well, you rebelled, you see. You rebelled as hippies, you see.
Yeah, but see, my sister rebelled too, but she still stayed in the family party, and she and I could bang heads if we wanted to, but it's just that we're sort of an anomaly in that there were other outside forces that changed our way of thinking, but that's not necessarily the norm. So when you were talking about your kids with the Brexit, yeah, that is something that they know, that is known, which is really sort of interesting. But you were also talking in the beginning, you know, we were talking about the elections, and recently there's a columnist over here, Peggy Noonan, who's been a journalist for a long, long time, and she wrote an article about one of the things that bothered her about the election was other than all the noise about the campaign nonsense, was the lack of depth in young politicians and journalists. And she said they listen to sound bites, they don't go back and read the speeches, they don't go back and get the whole story. They have become so accustomed to operating on sound bites that that's how they're presenting like their news or whatever, and that's got a very negative effect on people because, like you say, you don't go back to see, okay, was this a spoof? Is this story really true? No, you just throw it out there on Facebook like it's, you know, Harvard has found this, and because you didn't bother to go back and check your sources. And I'm in a situation now where I have a paper that's due tomorrow, and I thought I was going to be writing about this one particular, what I thought or was this historical event. And in researching it more, I found out, chances are this may not have even happened at all, but this person became because it was a young girl, became a very convenient way to portray someone as something, because culturally you wanted to have like more females taking on historic roles. And so everybody, I shouldn't say everybody, but a lot of people have been willing to overlook a lot of things that say, have proof that this ever even happened, in terms of this is a good person to put forward because she's a good role model. And yes, if it really happened, but there's no credible evidence that this whole myth has been built about this thing. So it's really interesting to see that if you don't really go back and really do the research, like as you're talking about, you can get so sidetracked on stuff that isn't true.
Yeah.
Simply because it's the soundbite and you grab the soundbite.
Yeah. And I think that's what Christians actually, a lot of Christians actually operate on, someone else's soundbite. They don't have that Berean spirit that would say, I'm going to go and find out for myself whether this is true. They just believe it gullibly and accept everything that's said, accept the things that they don't like, and then they don't agree with those when it challenges them, you know. And so there's this, oh yeah, I'll just be fed, feed me, because I don't want to go and make any food myself. I just want you to feed me, you know. And I used to say, I'm not going to feed you. I'll give you a recipe and you can go and make it yourself. Now, actually, I don't even say that. Now I basically say, hey, there's a whole list of ingredients here. Go and make up whatever else you want to engage with in this. Because actually, why would you want to believe me? Actually, let me stimulate you to go and engage God for yourself so that you can find out the revelation of this for yourself in the way that God will reveal it to you, which may be very different from how he reveals it to me. And I think that's ultimately what we have to raise up, a generation who are going to engage God for themselves and actually genuinely do have a testimony and can say, yes, I am a forerunner of something because I've experienced it. You know, Joshua and Caleb would have had no credibility with anybody had they not actually been in the promised land. Even though people actually didn't accept them or what they were saying, they still became the leaders of the whole nation. You know, God still put them into that place, even though they still had to go and follow for 40 years around the wilderness. God was preparing them because they had the encounter that was actually a testimony, because they were a forerunner. And the same is, we have to raise up people who get the revelation and have a actual encounter with God to be a true forerunner of what is to come. Otherwise, we don't want, Ian clones, Mike clones, Justin clones. And that's the danger. People just go to the next conference and get the next message and listen to the next thing, and then they repeat it and parrot it, and they don't have it, because they're just a construct of someone else, rather than, no, go back to God and get this personal revelation for yourselves. Then you have a testimony to share with somebody else, rather than, oh, so-and-so said. So-and-so said, and that's just the soundbite. And the Christian culture is no different than the rest of the world. It does operate on soundbites. It's like it's become the tweet culture. You've only got so many characters even to display this. Oh, and you can't say any more because people will get bored. So you have to present it in this way now that it's going to be culturally relevant. And it's like we've adopted that. And hence, the anathema of seeker-friendly church. It's just like, where did that come from? Well, from exactly the same thing, from the PR marketing world. How do you market God in a nice user-friendly way, which really misrepresents him just as much as every other thing misrepresents him, but has become a big thing, as well as other styles of things developed to actually meet people. And I know people will say, well, Paul said, be all things to all men, which is true, but in reality, they're still presenting the same, should be presenting the same God, whichever way we do it. And that's unfortunately not, because God has been shaped in our image. So God is user-friendly. Well, he really isn't user-friendly. He is a God of love, and he will speak the truth in love, and he will transform us in love, and he will do all those things, but he won't just be put in a box and confined by what we think he is, which is where a lot of religion puts him, firmly in a box. And I think evangelical thought probably being the number one construct that was operating in my mind, because I was brought up in an evangelical thing. Even the church I was christened in was called Bible Christian Church. That was the name of it. So I think, we've just got to be so careful that we don't follow the world's patterns for the sake of it, and try and be culturally relevant and present God as someone he isn't. And the only way we can truly present him as the God he is by experiencing that for ourselves. My understanding of God cannot come through somebody else. Otherwise, it's their understanding of God.
Do you think some of that comes from the drive that sometimes is overtly, is openly or subconsciously put out, in that you have to get it right? And it balances, because if you see God as being very punitive and angry and willing to punish any infractions, there is the real drive of like, we've got to find the right formula so that we don't fall into the hands of an angry God.
I totally agree. And I think that's the thing, when God has been challenging my mindsets and how I see things, when he showed me, when he reconnected an area of my mind, which meant I could see multiple possibilities at once, I immediately asked the question, which is the right one? That's the first thing I said to him when I saw all these possibilities rather than one. Oh, which is the right one? So I was constructed like that. And it does come from what you're saying. The wrong view of God, who's waiting to punish us if we get it wrong, rather than the God who's made us in his image, who's given us the creativity to make it whatever way right, because it's about creatively doing something, not doing it the only way. There is not only way. The only way is the way to God, which is through Jesus. Everything else is pretty much broad from a perspective of our relationship with God. And when he showed me this golden cord. I mean, I was like struggling to see, well, how do I make a choice of what to do, faced with a billion-fold opportunities of making a choice? And it's just like, it was much easier when there was only one. But in reality, I am creative. All those things come from me, not from him. I have the ability in his image to establish how to get from A to B. And this is what he showed me. He showed me the golden cord was attached to his heart of what was and to what will be. And everything in the middle was just flexible. I could bend this thing to go any way, in any order, as long as it was still rooted into his heart and would get to where it wanted to get to, which is outworking his will and purpose. And it was like, there is no right way. There's only the way. And I get to create that way. And if I got this construct taken out of my mind and deconstructed, I would find it much easier to create the way of that reality, which comes from my consciousness, which is shaped in the mind of Christ. And so I totally accept, because that's how I immediately thought when faced with all these potential things. It was just like, which is the right one? And I made that assumption based on a area of my mind that needed the right one. Why? Because if I didn't get the right one, I would get it wrong. And that causes us to take no risks because of fear of failing and getting it wrong, and therefore disappointing God. And potentially, even if you don't go down the punishment route, you would still see it as disappointing God, and he would be disapproving of you because you didn't do it the way he wanted you to. Then that outworks in the same thing when we establish foundations of embassies of heaven or ecclesia. People will try and do it to please us, thinking if they don't do it the way we would do it, then they must be getting it wrong. And we had to undo that here. And it's still hard sometimes, because I can see it in people's eyes. They're wanting me to show them how to do it. And I'm like, no, I'm not. I've already shown you enough. Go ahead and do it. And it's what if we get it wrong? Well, then we'll sort out if you get it wrong and we'll learn from it. But what makes you assume you're going to get it wrong? And it's, because we don't think like you do. It's just like, well, praise God you don't think I do. Otherwise, you'd have to have all the stuff deconstructed in your brain that's in mine. Just get your own deconstruction going on. Then you won't think like that. Because it just transpires that it filters through and infects everything. Because that's the way it's been done. And people are waiting for someone else to tell them how to do it. And they won't do it unless they've been told, because they won't take the risk of getting it wrong. So all these things come back to a very similar thing, our view of God and how God views us getting it right or wrong. And God doesn't have the same view of right and wrong that we do. And particularly, in this area of learning to use the consciousness that we have and the mind of Christ to create the reality of establishing the kingdom on earth as it is in heaven, he's given us the creativity of sonship. It's our responsibility to do the as it is and the on earth establishing. And it isn't going to be fixed and rigid, because it's got to come through people, which makes it hard, because people are always a problem. but B, it does give an infinite amount of freedom on how you do something. Because if I've got a billion choices of how to do something, and so does every other living stone get a billion choices, we have a trillion ways of actually seeing something established. And God isn't bothered one way or the other which way we do it, so long as it actually accomplishes what he wants, which is always going to be in righteousness. But there's no one fixed way. And the more we get that broken down, the freer we will become to be sons. Because we are slaves if we are waiting for the instructions of how to do it. Because that's what slaves are. They're waiting to be told what to do today, or how to do it today. You know, I've no problem God giving me revelation of what he wants me to do, but what he doesn't do is tell me how to do it. He just trusts me to do it through who he created me to be and outwork that. You know, which gives us a lot of flexibility, but unless we know God, then we will feel insecure. You know, and then we'll go back to what makes us secure, which is trying to do it the right way. You know, and getting it right all the time. You know? So we are, we're in this place, I think, where, you know, all these things are becoming more of a challenge to the old things. You know, God is challenging the old ways. I just never realized how many old ways there were. You know, I mean, I'm doing the engaging God thing and on new versus old, and I thought, oh, that'll be a couple of sessions. Now it's likely to be a whole module. You know, I mean, it's 13 sessions, and I've got probably another, I don't know how many. Because all of a sudden I'm seeing, this is all old. yeah. I didn't even think it was, you know. I mean, I'm going to do a session on new versus old, our understanding of God, as if I could probably do that in one session. But it's like, you know, because if we still have an old understanding of God, then we're going to do things according to that old understanding, and it ain't going to work. You know, so I just love, you know, God, you know, opening my eyes to the reality of who he is, you know, through my experiences of it. And love is the key to it all. I mean, you know, love has been the greatest, I guess, unveiling of it, of what love really is on multiple levels of experience. This is what love really is. You know, it isn't what I thought it was. He isn't who I thought he was. In regards to, now you've shown me something of love, even a glimpse has been enough to totally change how I then look at other people, you know, and then how I view you looking at other people. So it's, I think it's going to be a very interesting time.
Well, our pastor is going through his own version of deconstruction. So he and I, we will sometimes talk and laugh at some of the different things that we're going through. But one of the things that he does to really engage people in conversation is, we have a friend in our church who can do like special order t-shirts, you know, 1 or 2 at a time. And so he has all these different t-shirts. And one of them is, this past week he had "I am dead," and he had the Romans, the thing from Romans, but one that he has that he wears a lot is, it says God is in a good mood. And he will wear it out in public, especially if it's like a special occasion, you know, he's going to like a festival or something. And he said, it's amazing how many people will come up to him, and it will give him an opportunity to share with people, because they look at him like, God is really in a good mood. What do you mean by that? He said, it's just amazing. And also the amount of more like, quote unquote, the religious people who get really upset with that. Like, well, how can you say that God is in a good mood? You know, God is on the throne, and, you know, he's really looking to, you know, to punish sinners. So he gets hit from both sides, and he's got family that is sort of like in the retributive camp, that, you know, get really upset with him and basically have labeled him a heretic. But he said it's really been a good opportunity to just really engage people to say, well, you know, God really is in a good mood. And, you know, where they'll come back, well, boy, that's just not the way I was taught. And it really gives him opportunity to share, no, you've really been told something wrong. He's not angry. He's really in a good mood. So he does all kinds of crazy stuff like that. But
Awesome.
we have a good time talking about, you know, the different things that we're going through, like, well, throw that one out the window. That doesn't work anymore.
Yeah, awesome. And when you think of just a phrase on a t-shirt provokes a response, what will it be like when we're radiating the love of God in such a way that people actually feel it when they get close to us? And it overwhelms them with the goodness of God and the mercy of God and the grace of God and his wonderful love, just because they stand close enough and we are emanating that frequency around our lives. I mean, it will completely change evangelism, because it won't be about what we say. It will be, we are demonstrating the reality of our relationship with God, and others can experience that just by being around us, because we actually have that flowing from the inside out. Whether it's being, you know, transfigured and glowing in a physical way, which I think potentially will be possible, but we're still glowing because of the relationship we have being expressed around us as a tangible sense of that presence. We don't lock it up on the inside of us. We let it flow through us and around us. And I believe we will start to do that. And I think as a corporate sense, where we could say we're the mountain of the house of the Lord and people are drawn, what are they going to be drawn to? They're not going to be drawn to our fancy video productions. You know, they're going to be drawn to the revelation of the truth of who God is, expressed in a way that they can engage in tangibly and will be drawn to it. Whether it is a intangible, their spirit is just drawn to something, the atmosphere, or whether it's outworked in demonstrations of something, probably all of that mixed together, but it will be tangible and real. Because we will be the light, the city on a hill, not hidden, not under a bucket or whatever, but actually on display for people to see and experience and encounter in reality, not just theory. So we're not just going to present a gospel message, which is words, without the deeds of the good works that are essentially an expression of the love of God. You know, and we have a phrase here for what we do in the community: demonstrating the love and heart of God. You know, that's a tagline that goes to our projects, transforming lives by demonstrating the heart and love of God. That's been something that we have wanted to do, and we're only scratching the surface of doing that. But our whole heart is to demonstrate love, to go the extra mile, to be willing to care for those who no one else wants to care for, or to do that in a way to a particular group of people that we have been tasked to engage with. And that's our whole desire, is to do that. But the supernatural dimension of that is not yet fully manifested. You know, we want actually people not just to experience God's love by us demonstrating it, but to meet God, who is love, you know, and encounter him in reality by their engagement with us. So we have to have more of a supernatural demonstration of that, and to that to take place, we need to know him. You know, not know what we thought he was like. You know, so that's, you know, really does bring it back, I think, to the basic of all of it is God is love. You know, God is love. You know, and if we really, really knew what that meant, the whole world would change. You know, because it wouldn't take long for us to reach the world if we were demonstrating the love of God like that. You know, and I was looking at So, you know, I think last week I taught about, hey, we can reach the world in a few years if we just reach one person at a time. Well, it's going to be much easier to reach one person at a time when they experience and encounter God, so they've got something to give away to somebody else, you know. But even, you know, I think taking a rough estimate of 2.2 billion people who say they're Christians, let's say 10% of them are Christians and are really born again and have a relationship with God. If we were to reach one person each in 5 years, we would reach the whole world. Well, it's going to be much easier to reach people when we are truly demonstrating who God really is, and there is a tangible presence of him around us and through us, than it is going out trying to convince people by words. You know, so when Paul said, you know, I've not come with wise and persuasive word, but demonstrations of the Spirit and power, you know, we need to see what those demonstrations of the Spirit and power are in our day. You know, so that we really do demonstrate what is the true nature of God and his awesome power to love people. You know, why do we want to see healing? Because it's a demonstration that God loves someone and he doesn't want them to be sick or in any other way in bondage or in fear or oppressed or depressed or any other things. But God loves people so much that he wants people to be healed and restored and made whole and brought back into a relationship with him. Yeah. So a lot of change needs to take place, but we're in the journey. So, you know, bit by bit, as long as we keep going and keep embracing it, that change will take place. All right. So any other questions or things today?
Well, Mike, I was just reflecting on, you know, what you're saying about God is love, because, you know, you say that to a lot of people, and, you know, and they're in agreement with that. You know, the Bible says that God is love, but then they always add the but, you know, God is love, but he's also just, or God is love, but he's also, you know, something else, something that's in their construct of what they believe. And I think that's where, you know, how the Bible says God is love and God is light. That's the only two things God says what he is, or the Bible says what God is. That light is the light that what you said that happened to Paul. It's that light, or Saul on the road. That light is what dispels that darkness, that covering that's over everybody's minds, that they can't see the truth of the glorious good news of the gospel and all of that. And so that's what we need to work on, both of those, love and light.
Yeah, I mean, and actually they are the same thing. Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, I remember asking God when I was in 2010 and I was engaging him in heaven, and I asked him to explain love. I mean, I have a whole journal full of things he said, and I don't understand any of them. Now I'm going to go back and look at them again now, because I've got a deeper, because he spoke to me and I'm just like, because he talked about light and he talked about waves and particles. And I'm like, no, I asked you about love. I didn't ask you about light. And he spoke more about light and how waves can become particles and how things can condense down into an experience and an encounter. And I'm like, I don't get it. What are you on about? You know, but now actually I can see that light is energy. You know, it is a vibrating frequency that effectively can create matter and anything else. And it's like, I love the concept of light and being the light of the world, and light dispelling darkness and light bringing truth and all the aspects to it. Great. And we need to understand those things. But there's a sense where understanding of how God does things and how he creates things and how let there be light and all that, there's way more, and how that relates to love are very interactive and connected. And I don't still understand it fully, but I know there's a very strong connection between light and love. And if God is light and God is love and God is spirit, then they all actually are the same. just expressed in different ways, but they all must, because God is God, you know. So there must be a strong connection between light, spirit, love, and how that works, you know. And it will be very interesting over the next few years, I think, to see how that begins to evolve, because I think our consciousness and how our consciousness is an expression of light, and you know, we can see it as neurons firing off. Our thoughts are light, they are a vibrational frequency. How our thoughts create reality and how that needs to be an expression of love, I think very much need to go together, so that what we're creating is always going to be a love. And I think righteousness, we tend to think of, you know, from a religious understanding of what the word means, of being right with God. Righteousness is just the perfect expression of love. It's what love would do. It's how love would be. It's what love is. I mean, it's just, you break it down and it's like we've said, no, being righteous is this set of behaviors. Well, Jesus summed it up really clearly. Love me, love your neighbor as yourself. That actually covers all the bases. And that's really what the expression of light and love and spirit is all about. I'm being led by the Spirit. Oh, I'm being led by light, and I'm being led by love. Because if I'm being led by love, wow, I'm not going to do anything that contradicts what love is, other than the fact that I've interpreted love being this. And now I need to encounter love so that I can be an expression of love, and then that love will lead me. So, you know, the word, which is a light to my feet and a lamp to my path, or whatever that scripture, you know, needs a re-examination from a perspective of love and light. And therefore the word, which is also an expression of love and light. Huge subjects when you sort of start just sort of beginning to unpick it, and it all is like, ooh, you start pulling a thread and it's like, whoa, where's this going? Everything's unraveling as I start pulling this thread of like love. I'm going to pull the thread of love. Where's it going? You know, into everything, woven into the fabric of everything, because the whole universe is created out of love, which is light, which is spirit. You know, so it's woven within the fabric of everything. In him we live and move and have our being, in love. Good fun.
Oh, come on, Mike, you're getting rid of all that, you know, that good righteous anger, and, you know, we're going to see the bad guys get what they're really due.
Yeah, salvation.
Yes.
What did God do? Turn his enemies into his footstool, a place of worship. I mean, it's just like the whole Bible is full of it, really. We've just not seen it, or it's been veiled to us, but it's there. You know, it's there right the way through, God's desire for relationship with us. But yeah, go on. Carry on.
He said something to me last week, and I still don't understand this. I'm really going to have to chew on this a while. But we were just hanging out, and he said, when you look at the Old Testament, and you look at how Israel viewed me, he said it was from the point of view of a king. He said, I never wanted them to have a king, and if they never had had an earthly king, he said, you would have read an entirely different story. He said that whole book would read entirely different. He said, but they gravitated to what they understood, which was a king, because everybody had them all around them, so they wanted to be like everyone else. He said, and so a lot of their view of me is from the lens of what they thought a king should look like, and what a king does and how he acts. He said, and it's not me. He said, but that was what they were comfortable with. And so he said, when you read some of it, understand that's the lens that it's coming through.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And you know, God has been showing me the same thing from, you know, how do you equate the God of the Old Testament with what Jesus expressed, the full expression of God on earth? And you look at it and think, whoa, this is a different God, you know? And I was asking him, well, how do you explain that? And I can understand from, you know, we don't understand the full picture of what he was dealing with in terms of seed pollution and genetic manipulation and who people really were and whether they were human or not, in terms of his dealing with them, in terms of the spiritual aspect of that. But what he started to show me was, and this is where I'm trying to understand, work through, is he gave the rights to the creation to man, and man chose to follow the pathway of the knowledge of good and evil and handed the authority to the enemy. And therefore God was operating within what he had ordained to be, which is us having authority. Therefore, the retributive structure of the Old Testament is more man's framework of the need for those things rather than God's. But God had to operate within it because he had given us the authority and had to relate to people through that authority that he's given us. So much of what we see as what God is like is actually just what man is like, you know, and as a reflection of God. And we sort of, when you start looking at from a different perspective, and you realize actually that isn't how God really is, because everything has to be seen through the lens of Jesus, who is the fullest expression of God on earth. Then if everything is seen through that lens, then what were people looking at then? And why were they looking at it in that way? So when you then come to what happened with Jesus on the cross, God wasn't punishing him. God wasn't persecuting him. God wasn't. Man did. Man crucified him. Man put him on the cross. Yeah, man scourged him and beat him, and God didn't. And we attribute to God our characteristics. And you're right. It's like they wanted a king, and then they attributed to God what they thought a king was going to be like. So I think, you know, we're on the same sort of path to seeing things of what it was like, because God said the same thing to me. What you're seeing in the Old Testament is man's view of me. And you get glimpses of where I talk to people, who I engage with, and you get who I really am when they set a precedent that allows me to do things, which is why you're always looking for a man to set a precedent, because then that gives him the authorization to act who he really is. You know, did God really want Abraham to kill his son? No. But a precedent was set, you know, and that's why he's made covenants and agreements to help set precedents that would enable him to reveal the true self. Whereas the enemy wanted to destroy the seed so that the true revelation of God would never come out. And Jesus would never be able to come as a full expression of God to be able to undo and give us a new lens to look through. So I think we are, you know, beginning to actually see what God is really like and what he was always like. But that means that we have to look at, it's us that shaped him in that form. That wasn't him, you know. He always wanted mercy to triumph over judgment. He always wanted, rather than sacrifices, he wanted obedience. He wanted relationship. You know, he never wanted a sacrifice, but man did. Man required a sacrifice. Because that was what the enemy did through the humanistic knowledge of the pathway of the tree of light, tree of knowledge of good and evil. You know, so it's quite an interesting thing when you start to look at, you know, sometimes I ask God and I just don't understand what he says, you know, but sometimes it's just like, I got a glimmer of what you're saying here. Now I've got to go and meditate on that, just like you said, just like, I've got to chew on this now. Because it's like, what does that mean? What are the implications of what you've just told me? Immense. Anyway.
Oh, yeah, because it changes your whole perspective.
Totally.
in terms of, I mean, like now when I have to go back and look at that, to look at it just from that perspective is to say, okay, I can understand where they came from, and I can understand how they drew conclusions that they did, but that they're not necessarily correct. But they were working with what they were working with the best that they had. Because, like you said, because if you look at it, he's constantly interrupting and saying, "No, I'm not like that. No, I'm not like that. No, I don't want sacrifices. Yes, I want to do you good." And those little snippets, he's always feeding those little snippets in which totally contradict the prevailing train of thought. He's always trying to change it, but it's difficult because the prevailing train of thought is so entrenched. Yeah. And so he just keeps working and working and working. I mean, finally Jesus comes, and then it explains why nobody really got him, because he just didn't fit the pattern in any way, shape, or form. And it was just major, as I like to say, cognitive dissonance. Where you had two conflicting views and you're trying to work between the two because they are totally incompatible. And you have to decide which one you're going to go with, because you can't have both. If you do, you become like James. You're the unstable person. You're the double-minded person. You have to make a decision one way or another. So he was totally not what they were expecting in a lot of respects. And when he really came and demonstrated who the Father was, I mean, just even to say to them, to call the Father Abba, they had no concept of, I mean, you couldn't even say God's name without the fear of being struck dead, and you're going to call him Daddy. You know, totally different, radical expression of who God was that was just, for them, so counterintuitive and went so against the grain of what was considered, you know, the acceptable, the doctrine of the day.
Yeah, that's right. And all those doctrines essentially came from the same path. You know, it came from man's understanding without God of like trying to be like God. So we have created God in our own image, but we have the right to do so. That's the thing. God gave us the right to shape this world according to our sonship, and we did it according to the wrong path. You know, the pathway to the tree of life was open. They just had to go through the fire of the sword. It was always open. It was never closed. You know, Enoch went through it. Elijah went through it. Others went through it. It was always open to go through. But man had made it so you had to go through the series of hoops to get to that, which is the man-made coverings that, you know, that's why Jesus cursed the fig tree. Because it was like, no, this is no longer going to work anymore, because now you've seen the truth. The truth is here. The way, the truth, the life is here. This fig tree is no longer going to bear fruit. It is going to wither and die. You know, it's just people are trying to be keeping it alive, you know, for the last 2,000 years. You know, in reality, I'm sure they took cuttings of it, you know.
But you think of it in terms of when Adam chose good and evil versus the tree of life, good and evil requires justice and retribution, and hey, things have to be straightened out, where the tree of life, none of that would have been necessary.
Yeah, that is exactly it. You know, and that is why God had to function within the choice that man made. And I know sovereignty of God stuff and all that, people would struggle with that, but actually God, as always, operates within our framework. And yes, he'll do everything he possibly can to establish relationship, but it's still our choice, you know. And, you know, eventually, as people get to continue to make that choice, then ultimately they will see the reality of what God is like. And the more we actually demonstrate the truth of that nature of character of God as being love, the easier it is for people to recognize him. But actually, we've done a really good job of promoting everything through the same path, the knowledge of good and evil. Therefore, retribution and retributive justice and all that stuff, rather than restoration, reconciliation, which are all terms about relationship. You know, well, I'm going to be reconciled only if you put it right. Well, Jesus made it very clear that we couldn't put it right. That's why he had to come and put it right for us. You know, we have no self-righteousness in ourselves. You know, and it's wonderful that actually he gives us the gift of righteousness, which doesn't come through works. So being right is a gift that's imputed to us, not something that we do or have to continue to do. We are right because he says so, not because we do something to prove that we're right, because that again goes back to the same path. We'll have to do good and not do evil. Still the same path. No, I need relationship. And if I've got a relationship, I won't want to do anything that's evil. So it's quite interesting, isn't it, that we're in these sort of things, and God's starting to work these things through and unveil the real reality of who he is. And I think that's the key. You know, this is who he really is. No matter what else he's presented as, this is what he really is: love, light, spirit. Anyway, all right, better leave it there.